So we left off by trying to simplify each expression and state the excluded values. So that's what we're going to pick up. First thing we'll look for is the excluded values, and we do that by setting the denominator equals 0. So we get all the excluded values or anything that makes that a true statement. In this case we have two variables, so it's going to be all those pairs where x is equal to negative y, whatever that might be. Okay, now we're going to simplify the expression, and first we want to factor it. Factor both the numerator and the denominator, same way we've always been doing it. And then what we'll do is simplify by canceling any factors that are in common in the numerator and the denominator. And the factors that remain are our final simplified form. And that leaves us with just -2. And of course that's only true when we exclude all the values for x and y where x is equal to -y. Next example. We'll start again with the excluded values. Remember, we have to take the denominator, set it equal to 0, and solve. The 3 doesn't get us any solution, so we can divide it out. And we have 2 and -2. Those are the values we have to exclude. Now we're going to simplify by factoring, and then divide out the common factors. X squared minus 4 factors again, so we factor it again. Once everything's divided out, we write our final answer in simplest form, remembering that that's only equal to the original expression if we exclude -2 and 2. Another example. These are the excluded values. I just put them all down instead of showing it written out because I think you can follow a little faster. The next step is to simplify by factoring. Notice that we already factored the denominator to get the excluded values, so we don't have to do it again. We can use that same factored form that we did before. And then when we're done, we just have those two remaining factors, one in the numerator, one in the denominator, and that's our final answer. Okay, so here's another one. The denominator is the same as the other ones have been. Easy enough to factor. You may be looking at the numerator going, how am I going to factor that? Well, that's one where we'll probably use the box method because we have 4 terms. So let's see how that's going to go. We'll put the first, second, third, and fourth in order and check the diagonal products, and they match. So then we can just factor everything out, and then that's what we have. Those are our 2 factors. The denominators are refactored. That's our factored form. Now we can just cancel common factors, write our final answer, and that's going to be equivalent to the original except for our excluded values for x. We have no excluded values for y because there's no y in the denominator. Okay, this is a new kind of problem. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. We want to list 4 equivalent forms. You'll see what I just put on in a minute, so don't worry about pausing the video to get that. Okay, what we're doing is we're looking at what happens when we have a negative sign in front of a fraction. You can think of the numerator as one factor, and the first 2 forms are distributing the negative sign into the numerator, one as a group and one distributed. Those are equivalent to the original. We can do the same thing with the denominator by considering the denominator a group and then distributing the negative in. So those 4 forms are equivalent to the original. So for the next 2, there's 2 more examples of that. I'd like you to try it, like pause it, try it, and then see if you get it right. Try all 4 forms. So for this one, try to do all those same 4 forms. Push the negative sign into the numerator first and then into the denominator to see what they are, and see if you get them. Those are the first 2, and those are the second 2. So make sure that this is comfortable, that you recognize that all those forms are equivalent. And one more. So distributing the negative into the numerator gives you those 2 forms. Distributing the negative into the denominator gives you those 2 forms. They're all the same. Okay, now we get to multiplication. So we want to find the product of these two rational expressions. We want to simplify it, and we want to state any excluded values. So here's the way we're going to do these. First, we're going to factor everything, because we have to factor it to find the excluded values, and we have to factor it to simplify, so we might as well just factor everything first. That's the factored form. Then we'll find our excluded values. That means setting the denominators all equal to 0 and picking up any solutions that they produce. So 0 and 1 are the values we have to exclude for the variable p. Now we're going to cancel any common factors. Any numerator factor can cancel with any denominator factor because it's all multiplication. So it's like one big fraction. So those factors are in common, and p squared is really p times p, so one of those factors cancels. And now we'll just pull out whatever we have remaining and simplify it, and we see that we have that as our final answer, remembering of course that p cannot equal either 0 or 1. Here's another one. First step is factor everything. You should pause it and try to make sure you can follow along and do these. Our excluded values come from the denominators set equal to 0. So you should be able to see that the denominators would give us those excluded values. Then we're going to cancel everything that's in common numerator and denominator and write our final result. Check it to make sure it doesn't simplify further. And if it doesn't, we say we're done, and we are. So that's an equivalent expression for the product listed at the beginning, with the exception of those values for x. We can't use those excluded values for x. Here's another one. This one already has one of the denominators in factored form, and that trinomial will not factor further. The reasons why are outside the scope of this course. They won't factor further, and there is no solution when you set it equal to 0. You might remember from previous classes something called the quadratic formula, and you would find if you used the quadratic formula on that you wouldn't get any solution, but you just trust me on this one. So just 5x and x plus 1 are going to give us our excluded values. Then we're going to cancel everything and simplify, and you should be able to follow all that canceling, hopefully, and realize that all the factors cancel except for the value -9. So that's our final answer. All of that other stuff is equal to just -9 as long as we don't put in -1 or 0 for x. Okay, here's another one. Factoring everything. So those are all the numerators and denominators factored. Before we cancel, we're going to find the excluded values. 4, 6, 7, and 10 have to be excluded. They come from the denominators. Then we can cancel and simplify. And then we can say, yes, that's our final answer because none of the factors are in common at that point. Okay, now when we get to division, it's a little different. We can't just cancel. We have to first rewrite it as multiplication. So we take the reciprocal of the second fraction, which means that we flip it over in non-technical terms. The excluded values we're going to take in 2 stages because we have one set of denominators, and then after we rewrite it as a multiplication, we're going to have another denominator that we don't have. So right now, both of these denominators give us 0 as an excluded value. That's fine. So let's rewrite this now as multiplication. The first factor, the first fraction stays exactly the same. We don't flip it, but we change division to multiplication, and then we reverse the numerator and denominators. Notice now that we have a new denominator that we didn't have before. So that one is going to create our excluded value part 2. We set that one equal to 0. In this case, we get 0 again. So in all of our excluded values, the only value we have to worry about is 0. In other problems, we might have different values. Okay, now we can continue the way we were before. We can just cancel and simplify. So we'll cross out anything in numerators and denominators that cancel, and if it starts to get too busy and you don't know where you're at, just write over what you've got and look at it. And in this case, we can still go because we have k squared and k cubed, and they will simplify. So we can cancel out a k squared, and our final answer is that. We check it, we make sure nothing simplifies, so that's our final answer, excluding 0 for k. Another division problem. So First, we're going to factor everything without changing it to multiplication. We want to keep our original set of denominators, so we have our excluded values from part 1. Again, all we get is 0 from both of those denominators to exclude. Now we're going to rewrite it as multiplication. The first part stays the same, the second part flips, and we now have multiplication and a new denominator. So we go to excluded values part 2, which is the new denominator set equal to 0. That factor of 5 doesn't give us a solution, but x minus 1, that factor gives us 1. So now all together we have 2 values to exclude. And now we can cancel and simplify. So when you cancel out all of those common factors, notice that I divided a negative 1 out of x minus 1 to make it match 1 minus x. It doesn't matter which way you do it. You could have done a negative 1 out of the other factor, but you can divide that. That's what problem 14, that group is about. Okay, so when we're done, we just multiply what we have left. Numerators multiply, denominators multiply, and we can bring that negative sign out to the front of the fraction, and we have our final answer. Okay, so let's go a little faster. First, we factor everything. Then we take our first set of excluded values from the denominators. Then we rewrite it as multiplication. We have a new denominator now, so we have part 2, the new denominator. We take all the excluded values in a group together. Then we cancel and simplify. Verify that there's nothing in common, and we say that's our final answer. Make sure that you can follow this on your own, at your own pace. Okay, the last example. It's division, so the first thing we're going to do, factor everything. Next thing we're going to do is our excluded values, part 1, just these denominators. We get 2 values from that. Then we rewrite it as multiplication, as you see. We have another set of excluded values, and we put them all together. Remember, those excluded values come from setting each of those factors in the denominator equal to 0 and solving for the variable, in this case k. Now we can cancel everything, and we only write what we have that didn't cancel out, and our final answer is that. Okay, now you're ready to do all the problems in the quiz. Hopefully this makes sense to you. If not, send me an email. Okay, have fun.